In this documentary, we will analyze why the Titanic sank, looking at the unfolding disaster from inside the ship. We will witness real images of the iceberg that doomed the vessel. Then, we'll observe an experiment that recreates what the people who fell into the freezing waters experienced. Later, we'll explore astonishing theories about the tragedy and revisit the moment the Titanic was discovered for the very first time. Finally, we'll tour the ship's majestic ruins resting on the ocean floor. Telegraph operators were sending distress calls to nearby ships using Morse signals. The Titanic had begun to sink slowly. At the telegraph stood 25-year-old Jack Phillips. He refused to leave his post until the radio room was flooded. He acted heroically until his last breath. Yet nothing he did was enough. The Titanic would not be found until 73 years after it sank. Gauge reports, and there it was. Everything changed the moment the wreck was discovered. The mysterious story of the Titanic. Music begins. Everything had started long ago, back in 1912, 111 years before today. Newspapers printed bold headlines. The Titanic will depart on her maiden voyage. An illustration of the ship and the ticket prices stood proudly on the page. The story of the Titanic was rooted in rivalry. Transatlantic passenger travel was a lucrative and innovative industry, with ships carrying wealthy travelers and immigrants across the ocean. Two companies competed fiercely, White Star Line and Cunard. Cunard planned to build two ships that would break speed records while crossing the Atlantic. White Star Line wanted to respond, yet not by making faster ships. They chose another path. In 1908, the company gathered what could be called an army of workers, most of them Irish. Their goal was to create revolutionary passenger ships, the biggest, the most luxurious, and the most comfortable ever built. We may not be the fastest, they said, but who wants to cross an ocean while seasick? Their motto was clear. They wanted to dominate the Europe-America route within 5 years. Their first giant, RMS Olympic, was launched into the water. It was the largest ship the world had ever seen, 45,000 tons and capable of carrying 1,000 passengers. Soon after, they would launch their crowning jewel, RMS Titanic. Nearly 14,000 workers took part in building the Titanic. When it was launched, 200,000 spectators gathered to watch. Those who saw it slide into the water felt as though the earth itself was moving. For its time, it was a colossal marvel. One of its anchors alone weighed 15 tons. Inside, the ship was lavishly decorated with the most expensive furnishings. Some critics argued that the money spent on luxury should have gone to technology instead. Newer ships were using 4 propellers for better maneuverability, yet White Star Line did not aim for technological supremacy. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic prepared to depart from England on its maiden voyage to New York under Captain Edward Smith. The ship first headed to Cherbourg in France, then to Queenstown, and from there across the Atlantic. As it left port, operators warned that the southern route might contain icebergs, common alerts for the Atlantic, usually treated as routine. At 9:30 p.m., a ship ahead of them, the Mesaba, reported large icebergs along the route. The message reached the radio room, but never reached the captain. Operators Phillips and Harold were busy transmitting personal messages for wealthy first-class passengers, the fastest social communication method of the era. The night grew colder, almost unnaturally so. The ocean was flat like a mirror. On the Titanic, lookouts took turns in the crow's nest, switching every 2 hours. Near midnight, as the ship passed south of the Grand Banks, lookout Frederick Fleet spotted a shape in the darkness, an iceberg. He rang the bell 3 times and phoned the bridge. First Officer Murdoch shouted, "Hard starboard." The helm spun, but it was too late. The Titanic's speed, only 40 kilometers per hour, was still too much for such a vast ship to maneuver in time. 37 seconds later, at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic scraped the iceberg along her starboard side. The ice slit open the hull like a razor. Rivets popped, plates buckled, and 5 compartments began flooding. Captain Smith summoned Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, for an assessment. Andrews rushed below, only to confirm his worst fear. 5 compartments were flooding at a rate of 400 tons per minute. The Titanic was doomed. The order was given to abandon ship. Women and children first. Chaos spread. One of the crucial tasks was to send out distress calls. But earlier, the wireless operators had ignored several iceberg warnings. The Californian, just 20 miles away, had even stopped for the night after encountering dense ice. Its operator, Evans, had sent one last warning to the Titanic. "We are surrounded by ice. Be careful." A frustrated Jack Phillips had snapped back, "Shut up. I'm working." Now the Titanic was sinking, and the captain demanded urgent distress calls. Operators could reach ships within 400 miles. But the Californian did not answer. Their radio operator was asleep. The first ship to respond was the Frankfurt, but it was too far. Then came a reply from the Carpathia, which immediately steamed toward the Titanic. It would take 4 hours to arrive. The Titanic had only 2. Meanwhile, the Californian officers noticed distress rockets. Captain Lord, confused by outdated regulations about rocket colors, failed to act. Had he responded, hundreds more might have lived. At 2 a.m., the Titanic slipped beneath the waves. At dawn, rescue ships arrived. The lucky few who survived were pulled from the icy darkness. Photographs taken from the Carpathia showed the very iceberg that doomed the Titanic, still bearing the scar of the collision. Those in the water suffered terribly. Dr. Mike, an expert on extreme survival, recreated the conditions, near freezing Atlantic water. Even in safer 12 degrees Celsius water, a volunteer rapidly lost dexterity, strength, and body heat. At Titanic temperatures, near 0 degrees Celsius, most victims would have died within 30 minutes. The Titanic's sinking raised many questions. Some wondered if cheap materials had been used, but experiments showed that the ship's rivets were strong if hit directly. The problem was the glancing blow. As the iceberg scraped along the hull, outward-facing rivet heads were sheared off, opening a 9-meter gap. Had the Titanic struck the iceberg head-on, she likely would not have sunk. Natural conditions that night were bizarre. No moon, eerily calm seas, and atmospheric refraction that may have distorted visibility, hiding the iceberg until it was too late. Contrary to myth, binoculars would not have helped. Lookouts first noticed hazards with the naked eye. The iceberg itself had begun its journey 300 days earlier from Greenland, carried south by the Labrador Current, a 1.5 million ton relic of ancient snowfall, waiting in the dark for the Titanic. More than 1,500 people died, mostly men and lower-class passengers. Captain Smith, on his final voyage before retirement, perished with his ship. Decades later, digital mapping revealed the wreck in incredible detail. In 2022, Magellan and Atlanta Productions created the first complete 3D scan of the Titanic. More than 700,000 images were captured over 220 hours, revealing the wreck exactly as it lies at 4,000 meters depth. Serial numbers on the propellers are now visible. Abandoned shoes and scattered artifacts lie frozen in time. Despite these advances, key questions remain. Scientists race against corrosion. The ocean is consuming the ship. The Titanic also inspired eerie coincidences. 14 years before the sinking, author Morgan Robertson wrote Futility, The Wreck of the Titan, a novel describing a luxurious, unsinkable liner named Titan that struck an iceberg in April in the North Atlantic and sank. Its similarities remain unsettling. After the disaster, bodies drifted for days. Recovery ships collected 306 victims, but more than 1,200 were never found, now resting somewhere in the depths. At 4,000 meters, bones dissolve quickly. Only clothing and shoes remain. Entire families were left with no graves to mourn. There were many avoidable mistakes. The Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats, just enough to satisfy outdated regulations, even though the deck had room for far more. Many lifeboats were launched half empty. Had they been filled to capacity, 468 more lives could have been saved. The man responsible for reducing the number of lifeboats, White Star Chairman J. Bruce Ismay, survived by stepping into a lifeboat. He was never convicted, but lived the rest of his life in disgrace. Investigations originally claimed the iceberg created a 91-meter gash, but new scans revealed the tear was only around 9 meters, explaining the slow, 2-hour, 40-minute sinking. James Cameron's 2003 expedition revealed never-before-seen sections of the wreck. The crow's nest where the iceberg was first spotted, the once grand staircase, and first-class dining rooms, now silent, collapsed, and covered in sediment. On the ocean floor lie haunting reminders: a child's shoes, a pair of laces still tied, belongings of lives abruptly taken. One pair of tiny shoes belonged to a 19-month-old baby, one of the many infants who drowned that night. Not even God could sink her, they once said. Yet the unsinkable Titanic lies broken in the deep. For the world, it was a tragedy. For the lobsters in the kitchen awaiting their fate, it was a miracle. And miracles, after all, come unexpectedly.